Hello and welcome to MEL Make Stuff. My name is Melissa and this is episode number 20. Today I have two finished objects to show you and two works in progress. I have a lot of other projects going on, but I think that there are two that are particularly interesting at the moment, so those are the ones we'll be talking about today. All of the names of the patterns, the ISBN numbers for any books, and the names of the yarn that I'm using will be down below. I don't link anything because this podcast is not sponsored by any companies. I don't receive any pay for promoting anything, so that's why I don't link to any products. And this way, if you want to seek any of these items out, you can do an internet search and buy them from your preferred vendor. The first finished object I want to talk about today is what I'm wearing. This is the Enamorado sweater by Valentina Bogdanova. You may remember from a previous episode the yarn that I chose for this. The original pattern is written for one of those blown yarns, and I decided that I wanted to use something for my stash. So I held two yarns together. One was a worsted weight, natural, sort of silvery grayish brown Romney, and I held that together with a strand of the Shibui mohair. The Shibui mohair is now discontinued, but I had a very helpful commenter on an earlier video mention that anytime you see a put up in a skein that's like 328 yards per 25 grams, those tend to all be made at the same factory in Japan. So the Pearl Soho Tussock is a good sub for the Shibui if you're looking for something comparable. I'll put in a little bit of footage of what this looks like standing up. You can see that I did a rather cropped version. I didn't have to figure this out. This is actually written in the pattern. There is a longer version and then there is this cropped version. It tells you exactly where to start in the chart if you want this shorter version. This is knit from the bottom up. You start with a tubular cast on or whatever cast on of your choice, knit the body. Then you also do the same thing with the sleeves. So you start at the cuff and you knit the sleeves up, and then everything gets joined at the yoke basically, and then you do raglan decreases to the top. It has been a really long time since I have constructed a garment like that. I knit a lot of bottom up sweaters, but then I usually tend to knit the sleeves from the top down. And so in this case, it threw me off a little bit because I was also sizing up from the size recommended in the pattern, because I don't like a sort of heavier weight sweater to be very tight. And you can see if you look at the photos on the actual pattern page, the sweater it's a little more close fitting than this is on me. Like I have a lot of room in here. I probably have a good 6 to 7 inches of positive ease at the bust, and I wanted a little bit more of like a dropped armpit because I do not like really fuzzy stuff up in my pits. So I didn't know exactly how long to make the sleeves to have them be exactly right, considering that I was making these sort of fit alterations, or I was, going to be wearing it with a little more ease than recommended. And I think I pretty much got it right. The main thing was that I didn't want the sleeves to be too short. Usually I like a little bit of a bracelet length sleeve, but for something that is clearly a heavyweight sweater, a bracelet length sleeve maybe didn't make the most sense. So at any rate, I'm pretty happy with the length of these sleeves. I can bend my arm, raise my arm up, and my wrist will still be covered. So this is a really nice, warm winter sweater. So as far as what happens after you join here, you can see that there is a raglan decrease, which for my size, I did one of the middle of the road sizes. I think it was the fourth or fifth size. It's basically a 45-degree angle. You're doing the same amount of decreases on the body and sleeve. I think that might be different for the different sizes. And then once you get to this point, the instructions get a little vague. And I suspect it's because there are a lot of different sizes with a lot of different ways to decrease at this point that would have necessitated writing out a whole lot of extra written stuff in the pattern that would have made it really long. I sort of got the vibe that that's what happened here, because what happens is you do in 1 or 2 rows just a rapid large amount of decreases to shrink the circumference down to where you can start this sort of funnel neck. So the pattern, once you get to this point where you're doing this decrease round, it does tell you this is the sequence of stitches to make these ribs on the body morph gracefully into the ribs on this neck. But it says after the decrease round, you should have approximately, and then it lists out stitches for each size. But it doesn't quite tell you exactly how to get to that stitch count. So I actually don't have a problem with this, but I think that that is one of the things that maybe makes this a little bit more of an intermediate knit, like not really a super beginner knit. So I did have to sort of play with that a little bit. I did the decrease round once and ended up with still too many stitches for my, like, you should have approximately, 100 stitches or whatever it was. So I pulled it back and I had to do a couple more decreases. Like, I had to fit in a couple more decreases. I think I placed them over the shoulder. So that's one of those things. I suspect the pattern was probably written for the size below the one I did. And that size, I bet that neck decrease round works out perfectly. And then all of the rest of them, it's like you sort of have to fudge it a little bit, but you will end up with something approximating this shape. So that's just one thing to note about the pattern. Other than that, it's actually quite specific, and I don't have any problem at all with how it's written. I would definitely knit a pattern from this designer again. And then I love a funnel neck. It sort of looks like it's biasing a little bit, but I think that's just how I had it laid out the last time I blocked it. I have been wearing this as a sweatshirt as the winter is sort of ending here in New England. It's still pretty cold, actually. I'm totally comfortable in this at the moment. You can see that the neck is not particularly close fitting. I feel like I have a little bit of room in here, and the yarn, especially combined with that mohair, is really nice and soft. So I actually really am enjoying wearing this. So that is Enamorado by Valentina Bogdanova. My second finished object that I have to show you today is the Scout Shawl by Florence Spurling. One of the things that I really wanted to tackle this year was intarsia, and so I decided that this shawl was going to be my first real stab at experimenting with intarsia. And as far as that aspect of it, I have to say this is a perfect pattern for doing that. It actually might even be a little bit too easy if you're sort of more on the advanced side and you've just never done intarsia and want to try it. All of the intarsia joins are on the vertical plane as you're knitting the pattern, so I found it to be pretty easy to figure out like the tension needed as you're going over those vertical points. I'll put in some photos here of what the whole thing looks like. This turned out absolutely enormous. It is 89 inches long and it's about 15 inches wide at the widest part. So it's really sort of more like a scarf than a shawl. And it's sort of shaped like a trapezoid, which I found to be really interesting. And I suspect that it will sort of morph into more of like a crescent type shape, like a crescent with a flat top, which is one of my preferred shawl shapes anyway. So I think I'll be happy with that as well. One of the things that really attracted me to this pattern in the first place was the color palette, and so I wanted to try to stick close to that while using things that I already had in my stash. So I used 5 different yarns. All of them are superwash. I'll put the names of the different yarns down below. So here we can get a little close-up of some of the patterns in this shawl. So these joins right here, this is what I mean by the intarsia join being on the vertical plane. This, as you're knitting back and forth, you do the intarsia join here. And so you can see it's sort of just like a stitch sampler, and it very much looks like a patchwork quilt, which I absolutely love. This orangey red here was a strong choice. I stand by it. I think I like it. But it does stand out a little bit. I think it's cool, actually. I definitely have some favorites here. I really like this pink and green combo, and I also like these diagonal lines in this motif here. I really like this green and white combo. I really like this. I really like all of them. Let's be real. I really like this motif. I think that's really neat. Maybe you can see the differences in the types of yarns that I used. I talked about this the last time, but I think it's even more obvious now that the shawl is finished and blocked. So these 2 colors here, this green in the background is a singles yarn, single ply, and this one here is a 2-ply tweed yarn. So this pattern here has ended up being very soft and very undefined. And then over here we have 2 plied yarns, which are still different. This background color here is actually a sport weight cashmere blend, and this green one is just a sock yarn that I hand dyed some years ago. And you can see, you know, the more similar structure in the yarn, and also the difference, more stark difference in these colors here, make that pattern stand out a little bit more. I just think it's so cool. I really had a lot of fun making this. So you do get to start off with a pretty small section. It's knit end to end. And so you start off with this little tail here, and you get started just doing intarsia with your yarns on the side and this one in the middle. So you sort of get to ease into the color work and intarsia, which is nice. So as far as the maximum amount of strings you would have coming off of this project, the most that you have at any one time is 6 balls of yarn. So you will have 1 for either side of your border, which is a little garter stitch border on either side, and then 2 for one block and 2 for the other block. There's no point where you have more sort of little patchwork pieces next to each other. So 6 balls of yarn is the most that you'll be dealing with. So what I chose to do was to use intarsia bobbins for the edges. I had 1 bobbin for each of these garter stitch edges, and then I would have the other yarns attached to the ball, so I didn't have to like continually wind off pieces and sort of be wasting yarn that way. And I didn't find it to be too difficult to manage. It was a project where I needed to get set up, like sitting cross-legged on the couch in exactly the right way, and I would keep 2 balls of yarn and 1 bobbin to my left side, and the other 2 balls and the other bobbin on my right side, and then I would do a right side row and a wrong side row before I would allow myself to like get up and do anything. Because if I had to get up in the middle of that, it would just, all of the yarns would go like this, and then it would take me a couple minutes to untangle them, and that's just not what I want to spend my time doing. Another thing to note is that the color work is all knit flat. So if you are not a person who likes purling and color work, maybe this isn't the project for you. There's also a smaller version of it. I don't know what it's called, the Scout Mini maybe. And it's more like a little neck scarf style. So if you're not sure if you're gonna really like this technique, you might give that one a go. So just to show you more of what the wrong side of this looks like, here we go. I tend to leave my ends long until I have had a chance to wear it a couple times and make sure that those aren't going to work their way to the front, and then I'll clip them a little shorter. But you can see that this is what the intarsia joint ends up looking like. It's not really a big deal. It feels like before you start doing intarsia, it feels like it will be a big deal. And then you start doing it and it's like, oh, this is actually pretty simple. The other thing to keep in mind is your color dominance. So which hand are you holding your main versus your contrast color, or which order are they on your finger if you're using both if you're carrying both yarns in your left hand. Because with some of these stitch patterns, like this one, it will be extremely apparent if you all of a sudden, you know, maybe you take a break and you come back and you pick up the wrong color, you know, you pick up your contrast color. So ordinarily you carry your contrast color in your left hander to the left. And if you were to take a break and come back to this and pick up that contrast color with your right hand, you would really be able to tell in a pattern like this. It would create a very obvious sort of line. And that might not be what you're going for. Like I actually might have done it right here. Can you see? It's just a little bit of unevenness here. It's hard to tell if that's in blocking or if it's because I switched my hands accidentally for a row. So practicing that on a swatch, or, you know, just going for it honestly on this little, you start with such a small section here, you can sort of practice on this first section without doing, you know, a whole lot of damage to the rest of the shawl as you're figuring out which hand you want to hold the colors in. So that is the Scout shawl. If you have experience knitting colorwork flat and you just want to get some intarsia experience, I would say this is a perfect project. It's a big one. It's a big project, but it's quite simple as far as the intarsia goes. And I also did not need to look up any instructions outside of what was in the pattern. It's explained, like, it's very simple and it's written simply, and you think that can't be all that there is to this intarsia thing, but it really is. It's a good pattern, so highly recommend. For my 2 works in progress, one of them I had in my 2023 plans, so that one I knew was coming. The other one I wanted to make last year. I got the idea for this project last year. I bought the yarn for it last year, and then I just sort of put it off for some reason. I pulled it out and started it, and I am really excited to show this to you, but you might want to like put some sunglasses on because this Colorwork combination is like eye-searing. So this pattern that I'm making is the Bouquet sweater by Junko Okamoto. I was never particularly enamored with this pattern. I really like a lot of Junko's designs, but this one, the original pattern sample is made in a marled yarn, and it's just hard to see what's going on. And so I was never particularly drawn to it until I saw Jackie from Caddy Jack's Knits made this some years ago, and she used a beautiful, it was like a very fluffy yarn, and it was like white and sort of a caramel gold color, and I could see the pattern and see what was going on in the colors that she chose, and I was like, whoa, I gotta make this thing. So at some point last year, sort of as part of my journey of figuring out how to combine like reds and greens and pinks and greens, I got this idea in my head of like a purplish red and a sea green together. And I got my color cards out and I decided to order these 2 yarns from Harrisville Designs. So here's the combo, and it is this vibrant in real life for sure. This is their worsted weight yarn. So this is Harrisville Designs Highland in Garnet is this color, and this is sea green, aptly named. And so these are my 2 colors. So let me show you where I am so far. I'm basically done. I've been working on this on and off for a couple months. I know I haven't recorded in a while and had COVID and had work stuff going on and blah, blah, blah. So here it is. It's really almost done. I have one sleeve done as well, and I have the neckline done. So let me talk to you a little bit about this whole thing. So in the pattern, it is written to be worked from the top down, and you actually start with the neckline and you do some double knitting for the neckline. I didn't do that because I have an enormous head, and double knitting at a neckline doesn't always work for me. By double knitting, I mean you'll see rounds of like where you knit one stitch and slip one with the yarn in front is usually how it goes. And it creates a very firm neckline, sometimes to the point where I worry that I can't get it on over my melon. So I don't typically do the neckline first off, even if it's written in a pattern. I will cast on provisionally right below the neckline and knit some amount of the body, usually to below the armholes, and then I'll come back and do a neckline. So that is what I did here, and I just ended up knitting a normal 1x1 rib on the neck, and I did a sewn bind off, so not a tubular bind off. You'll sometimes see this referred to as an Italian bind off with no setup rows, so I like to call it the sewn bind off. So the yoke is extremely interesting. You can see we have this V motif, and this is the front. You know, it's going to be worn like this. If we turn it around and we look at what's going on over the top of the shoulders and on the back, we can see 2 more of these V motifs. And so the way that this is constructed is actually sort of a hybrid yoke 3-part raglan. Maybe it will help if I draw a picture of this actually. So if we're looking at a sweater from the top, what you will see in a regular circular yoke is a shape like this, right? Here's the neckline, it's just a circle. There's even increases out to the bottom of the yoke, and then sometimes, you know, you might have some short rows in here a little bit to raise the back neckline. So that's a normal circular yoke. Then we have a typical raglan. So you have these, if we're talking about a top-down garment, you have your neck you cast on, and then you increase going out, at 4 points on the body. So you have your front, your back, and 2 sleeves. And if you spread it out, once you're done with your raglan yoke and you open it up, you get sort of this rectangular shape. And now here is what we have going on for this sweater. So let's say if this is the front, you have sort of a triangular shaped yoke where this is actually the middle of the back. And you have decreases that are really in sort of this area. You end up having decreases really concentrated at these 3 points. And it creates a very weird shape. I mean, it creates a non-standard shape where the back of the neck almost wants to droop a little bit because the neck is actually sort of triangle shaped. Because knitted fabric is so malleable a lot of the time, the way that this is tending to look on the finished project that I've seen is that the back actually will maybe come down a little bit lower at that point at the back of the neck than a lot of people are comfortable with. And so it doesn't come down low, right? But like for a winter sweater, you might want something higher up in the back of your neck. And so there are a number of ways that people are sort of dealing with this, which I find interesting. I've seen in a lot of people's notes that they're doing short rows to raise the back of the neck, or they're creating more of a standard raglan shape, and all kinds of things people are doing to get around the sort of unconventional nature of the structure of this yoke. But I actually think that that's the coolest part of this, is that we have these designs that are sort of curving over the shoulder. There are some areas where the fabric looks a little puckery at the moment because this isn't blocked, and we're looking at the back here. So you can sort of see that it looks like this, that there's a weird bump here that may or may not block out, and you can see that there are really just a lot of increases concentrated in these sort of blank areas that don't have this color work on them. And I think this can be a tricky knit for a lot of reasons. One of them is this type of color work, which I have most commonly seen in Estonian color work, where we have essentially floats on the outside of the work, can be challenging to maintain what's going to be a good tension here, in addition to however it is that you're dealing with your floats on the inside of this garment. We also have in some instances very large distances between these little pattern motifs, so that can be challenging as well. And so what a lot of people have done to deal with what is going on the inside of this garment is to use jacquard floats. I will link a fruity knitting video below that has some good information about how to set up jacquard floats. I started off, so I actually knit the yoke of this 3 times. I knit, my first try was maybe from the neck to about here. Didn't like how the jacquard floats were working out. So I ripped it out, started doing them a slightly different way, still didn't like it. And so what I'm actually doing on the inside of this is just normal, standard colorwork floats. For me, that's working, and for my yarn choice, that's working. But I do think in a lot of cases, the jacquard floats are definitely going to be a better choice for this. So let me show you actually my second attempt, which I saved. So what jacquard floats do is they basically create a web on the inside of the knitting. So this is my second yoke. The first one I had pulled entirely out. And after I had decided I didn't like the way this one was turning out, I was like, I don't feel like pulling it out, I'm just starting again. So here we can see actually I had provisionally cast on at the neck, and I have my 3 motifs. So maybe we can actually see the actual shape of the neckline is there. You can see that triangle shape. And you can see that the way the increases are situated in this pattern just creates a lot of fabric very rapidly. Some instances these increases here are very close together, and so it just creates a lot of fabric all at once. And so here is what the jacquard floats look like on the back side of the work. So I'm actually doing a combo of regular colorwork floats in the actual pattern, where we have the main pattern on the right side. You can see sort of normal looking colorwork floats in here, and then we have this, which is the jacquard web that gets created. So when you set up your jacquard floats, which is explained very clearly in the Fruity Knitting video that's linked below, you choose how often you're going to catch your float on the backside. And I mean, you can see that there are no floats visible on the right side, but we have this sort of web on the back that is not actually connected to the knitting, other than at the top and bottom where you decide to start and end these columns. I think jacquard floats are an excellent application for instances where you are sort of on the fence about whether to do intarsia for like a single motif in a garment or something like that, or where you have big stretches where you would have to catch the floats a bunch of times on the back of the work, and maybe the yarn that you're choosing is such that that type of thing will show on the front. What I mean by that is if you're using a very smooth yarn, like a superwash yarn, or a very light colored yarn, that would be an instance where I think the jacquard float is probably a better choice, because if you have a light colored yarn for your main color and you are trying to carry a darker colored yarn across a light color, you might have issues with that showing through to the front. Again, it's going to depend on what exact yarn you're using, because this type of yarn is extremely woolly. I mean, this is a colorwork yarn. It's not smooth. It's a very lofty woolen spun yarn. So I am not worried about any floats of any kind showing through with this yarn, but you may have a different experience if you're using a lighter colored yarn or a smoother yarn. So for my first iteration of this, when I set up these jacquard floats, I had actually been knitting the jacquard float instead of purling it. And this will make more sense once you've seen the Fruity Knitting video. But what that did was create columns of purl stitches here. And I didn't like how much bulk it was creating. So I ripped that out. I did my jacquard float setup again. And at that time I started purling the jacquard float. And that is what resulted in this, which, you know, is actually, I think, fine. I think that this would block out flat. I'm not worried about the final texture of the front of this, the way it appears. But initially I was thinking that I was going to make this a short sleeved version, like a, you know, t-shirt length sleeve. And I didn't want to have that additional web on the inside because it felt like it was trapping a lot of air and it was going to be extremely warm. So for most applications, again, like this is a winter sweater, you want it to be warm, right? So I think the jacquard float is actually a good choice for this. Because I was thinking I would keep this short sleeve, because I'm making it a dress, that's the other thing I'll show you here, I decided that I didn't want anything that was going to create sort of an extra heat trapping area inside of the sweater. I didn't want this to be overly hot. Of course, I've since decided to make a 3/4 sleeve, so the jacquard floats probably would have been okay, but whatever. I'll show you here what the regular floats look like now. So here's what the outside looks like, and here's what the inside looks like. Honestly, it really has not been a big deal. I thought this was going to be a royal pain to carry these floats across such long distances between the increased areas, but actually it's fine. You just sort of get in a rhythm of, you know, not catching the float at the same place as the previous round, and it looks like a big deal on the inside, but it's fine. It hasn't been a problem at all. So you can see what my pre-blocked float tension looks like. I do tend to keep my floats pretty loose. I don't want to have to fight with this thing to block it at the end. So you can really see the divisions between the charts here. This is chart A, or the chart 1, and then we have the second chart. And then because I'm making this a dress length, I'm adding another set of charts here. So the way the original pattern is written has the colorwork stop at this point. It's meant to be sort of a cropped boxy look. And there are different charts at this point for the front and back. So this one is chart 2 in the pattern. And then this one is chart 3. And so what I'm doing to add length is I'm reversing that and I'm doing the opposite chart on the back. So here I have chart 3 and chart 2. And then on the front, chart 2 and chart 3. And then I'm just basically knitting until it's a decent length, doing some 1x1 rib. And then for the sleeve, it looks very short, but because the yoke is one of those sort of drop armpit style yokes, this actually is ending up around a below elbow length on me. So I'm working on my second sleeve right now, and then I will come back and do the rest of my rib. So my original plan for that was to make this dress to wear at Knit City Montreal, because I am going to Knit City Montreal in May. I'm again meeting up with Selma from Little Big Knits and Mega from Skeins of Dreams, and we're gonna have a lot of fun. Selma did point out that it is probably going to be too hot for something like this in a very kind way. She mentioned that and I was like, yeah, that's probably true. So I'm thinking through some other ideas. I certainly have things I can wear, but it would be sort of fun to knit something for it. So we'll see if I end up doing that. But at any rate, there's not a big rush on this to get it done, but I'm very close to being done, so I might as well just go ahead and finish it. Regarding the yarn, if you buy this yarn from Harrisville on cones, it's meant for weaving, so there is still spinning oil in here, and it is quite strong smell. So if you're sensitive to that, they have washed skeins of this, which smell totally fine in my opinion. The smell of the yarn on the cones can be a little bit overwhelming if you're not used to it. So that's just something to note. The yarn is beautiful. I love using this stuff. It's made locally to me, so I will try to use Harrisville yarn really anytime I can. They have beautiful colors and I really like this stuff. So that is how far I am on my Bouquet dress by Junko Okamoto. And the second work in progress that I have to show you today is another Bohus sweater. This is the Blue Shimmer by Annalisa Mannheimer Lunn. I am again using the Poems of Color book, Knitting in the Bohus Tradition by Wendy Keele. ISBN number will be down below. And the Blue Shimmer is actually this one here on the cover. I wanted to knit this one entirely from stash, and one of the nice things about these types of yokes is that there are so many colors that you don't end up using a whole lot of any one of them really. So I was actually able to pull a whole bunch of blues and greens out of my stash because I decided to try to replicate this original color palette here. Here is the version from the book. You can see this is the cardigan version, obviously. I am making the yoke pullover version. And here is mine. So I think I was able to get quite close to the original colors, at least as shown in the book. One thing I use that is a little more vibrant, I think, is the blue that is in the center of these motifs. And here is just a little bit stronger than in the original pattern, but I was happy to be able to use this color from my stash because I don't knit with this color a whole lot. It's just a very strong blue for me. But I think it works here. I think it gives a nice effect. So a couple of nice features of this pattern. So you start by knitting the rib. And for this one, I actually did start at the top because I wanted to just follow the pattern for this yoke. I wasn't going to try to play around with inserting short rows for the neck or anything like that. There are no short rows at the back of the neck in the top or incorporated into the yoke pattern, but there are short rows below the yoke. So that is how this pattern is written. You could easily insert some short rows like in this main color or even at certain places throughout the back of this yoke. There are a number of rows where you have sort of just one color in here where you could throw in a short row or two if you really wanted to. But for this one, I wanted to sort of stick to the traditional look. So I did start with it was a provisional cast on for the ribbing. You knit a couple inches of rib and then you join the provisional cast on to your stitches on your needle and you keep going. So I'll give you a close-up of my colors here. These are a range of Jameson's and Smith. This bright blue is actually a Sincere Sheep Sport. Like, it's not the same type of yarn at all, but whatever, I used it. The tan is sort of like a Rowan felted tweed. It's like a single. I just combined whatever I had that was the right color. And in some instances, I actually held a mohair together. So the dark background here and this brown here are actually mohair and fingering weight combos. I originally decided to do that because Bohus sweaters are often knit with an Angora yarn, so they're very fuzzy, and that sort of creates part of the effect of just colors swimming together in the yoke. And so I wanted to try to replicate that a little bit by adding mohair here and there. It didn't do anything super major in terms of, helping the colors flow together or whatever, but it's all right. It was a nice thought anyway. Then after you do the short rows below the yoke, you separate off your sleeves like any typical yoke sweater that's made from the top down. You knit your body however long you want it, come back up and knit the sleeves from the top down. So as you can see, I'm on the boring part now, which is why progress has halted. This is now at the point where I use it for like meetings. If I'm sitting in meetings or trainings and I can have my hands busy, this is what I'm working on at those times. And so the main color of this yarn that I'm using is some Cascade 220 that I've had in my stash for a long time. Cascade 220 fingering. This is Indigo Frost Heather, I think is the colorway. It's like a very light icy blue. So I'm very happy to be using up some of that because it's been sitting around for a long time. So there's a couple of things to note about the way this pattern is written. And I have to give a big shout out to commenter Nadia, who is a frequent commenter on my videos. So hello Nadia, thank you for your comment about this yoke. She had pointed out, so she has this book and she had said, make sure you look at these certain rows in the yoke where the way that the pattern is laid out is going to create a big jog essentially on the back of the yoke. And so this is a problem that I see often in colorwork yokes. They'll be written where the beginning of round is maybe in a place that's quite ugly. Like if it's right down the center of the back, it's very obvious if you're looking at it from the back. And some motifs, it's very hard to really disguise the beginning of that jog. So sometimes there's not a whole lot designers can do about it, but other times you see it and it's just like, there is a better way to redo that beginning of round so that it's less obvious. So with the way this pattern is written, the beginning of round is placed where I personally think is the best placement, which is down the back of the right shoulder. So this is the front. And the beginning of round is actually here. And because of Nadia's good comment and because I was aware of this going into it, I was able to really sort of mess with the placement of these motifs so that it really disguises the beginning of round and makes it so that you really can't tell where that beginning of round is. And if you follow the pattern as laid out in the chart, you will get a jog. I'm actually going to show this to you because it's on the front of the book. The original chart, which is replicated in the book, is on the front cover of the book. So you can maybe see that with the way some of these repeats are laid out, the motifs that are very big and obvious, particularly this one right here where we have these big like medallions, it has the beginning of a round right in the center of one of these motifs. And same thing up here actually. We have the beginning of round in the center of one of the motifs. And so if you just go ahead and knit this as it appears in the book, when you get that jog in the motif, that's when you can really see that beginning of round, and it's just doesn't look great, you know? But the good news is, and as Nadia pointed out, none of these motifs, unlike a lot of other colorwork patterns, none of these motifs really have any relation to the ones that are next to them. Next in the yoke, I mean. And so you can easily shift, like this motif, I shifted, you know, a stitch or two to one direction, and it didn't affect the overall look because we don't have real like vertical cohesion in these motifs down the yoke. One of the other interesting things that Nadia pointed out is there is, so this here is an extant garment. This is one of the original blue shimmer yokes. And you can see that we have some 1x1 color work in this little round here. But on the chart, it's more like a tooth motif. Nadia had pointed that out, and I thought it was really interesting, you know, like I wonder if the change to 1x1 color work for those couple of rounds was a knitter's choice, like the knitter thought that that would be a better look, or if that was a change that was made later to the chart. You know, we don't know with the information that we have like here in this room, but I liked the 1x1 color work, and so I replicated that on my yoke. So there we have it, the blue shimmer. Finishing this is not a super priority for me at the moment because it's fulfilling a needed function in my life. I don't have any other really small, simple projects that I can work on that are just stockinette for meeting knitting. So I'll probably work on this sporadically throughout the summer as I get the chance to, and then focus on it going into the fall so that I can actually wear it in the fall. So I think that is all I have for you today. I will be doing a Knit City Montreal vlog. I'm not entirely sure if I will be back with you here before that festival. Hopefully I will be. But in case I'm not, we are planning to be at the festival on Saturday. So if you are going, please feel free to say hi and we'll see what I'm wearing. If it's cold, I'll probably have the Bouquet dress. If it's not, we'll see. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.